You forget everything, Mom. You're not really reliable anymore. The words hit me like ice water, freezing me in place as I stood in the hallway of my Chicago brownstone, my reflection staring back at me from the antique mirror that had belonged to my mother. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, please just leave a like and subscribe. It will help me continue sharing these stories that need to be heard. My name is Margaret Eleanor Walsh, and at 73 years old, I had just heard my only son dismiss 38 years of sacrifice with the casual cruelty of someone commenting on the weather. The phone didn't slip from my trembling hand. I almost wish it had. That would have given me an excuse for the way my world tilted sideways in that moment. Michael was calling about the family trust. The $4 million fund I had built from nothing after his father James died of a heart attack when Michael was only 12. Every dollar in that account represented a choice. The winter coat I didn't buy for myself so I could put money aside. The vacation I never took. The restaurant meals I skipped in favor of peanut butter sandwiches. 38 years of working double shifts at Murphy's Diner on State Street. Of selling James's tools and his vintage Mustang. Of carefully investing the modest life insurance payout and my widow's benefits. I had transferred the money to a temporary holding account 3 weeks earlier, telling Michael I needed time to review the distribution plan. I wanted to make sure everything was fair, that everyone's needs were properly considered. It was supposed to be our safety net. Money for a shared family home, for his children's college tuition, for medical emergencies, for the future I thought we'd build together. The brownstone around me felt suddenly cavernous, its familiar creaks and settling sounds amplified by the silence that followed his words. The late afternoon sun slanted through the lace curtains my grandmother had made, casting intricate shadows across the hardwood floors James had refinished with his own hands 40 years ago. Everything in this house held memories. The Persian rug where Michael had taken his first steps, the kitchen table where I'd helped him with homework every night, the living room where we'd opened Christmas presents and celebrated birthdays and mourned losses together. I need that money accessible, Mom, Michael continued, his voice carrying the impatient tone he used when discussing what he considered my increasingly frequent episodes. Sarah's worried about your cognitive state, the way you've been lately. Yesterday you asked me 3 times what day it was. The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth twisted into something ugly. Yes, I had asked him about the day, but only because I'd been so disoriented by grief, so overwhelmed by the constant demands for money and support, that I'd lost track of time. Not because my mind was failing, but because my heart was breaking in slow motion, one disappointment at a time. I closed my eyes and saw Michael as he used to be, 7 years old, gap-toothed, running into the kitchen after school with his backpack bouncing and his face bright with excitement. "Mama, Mama, look what I drew!" And he'd present me with construction paper masterpieces, stick figures holding hands under crayon suns, little hearts with "me plus Mom" scrawled across them in his careful first-grade handwriting. That boy used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms scared him, used to bring me dandelions picked from the neighbor's yard and present them like they were roses. When James died, 8-year-old Michael had wrapped his small arms around my neck and whispered, "Don't worry, Mama. I'll take care of you now." When had that little boy been replaced by this stranger who spoke to me like I was a burden to be managed? "Michael," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "I built that fund. Every penny of it came from my work, my sacrifices, my choices. I think I'm entitled to take some time to consider how it should be used." "Mom, you're being dramatic. We just need access restored so we can handle the expenses. Olivia needs her braces adjusted, the twins are starting soccer camp, and our mortgage payment is due next week. You know we depend on that fund for these things." Depend? The word settled over me like a heavy blanket, suffocating in its implications. When had love become indistinguishable from dependency? When had my value as a mother, as a human being, become measured solely by my ability to solve their financial problems? I thought about the call I'd made to Michael just 2 weeks earlier. I'd fainted in the kitchen while baking his favorite apple pie, the same recipe my mother had taught me, the one I'd made for every birthday and holiday for 50 years. I'd come to on the cold linoleum floor, my golden retriever Honey licking my face while the smoke alarm shrieked and the smell of burned sugar filled the air. Disoriented and scared, I'd managed to dial his number with shaking fingers. No answer. I'd tried again, my heart racing as I wondered if this was serious, if I was having a stroke or a heart attack like James had. Straight to voicemail. I'd sent a text with fumbling thumbs. "Michael, I fell in the kitchen today. I think I need someone to check on me." His response had come 2 hours later, 2 hours during which I'd sat in James's old recliner, wondering if anyone would find me if something terrible happened. "Sorry, Mom, crazy day at work. Maybe call Mrs. Henderson next door? You said she helps out sometimes." Mrs. Henderson, a kind but near-deaf 80-year-old widow who struggled to walk to her mailbox. I hadn't eaten for 3 days after that, hadn't showered, hadn't even opened the curtains to let sunlight into the house that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. I'd just sat in that recliner, listening to the old radiator clank and feeling like a ghost haunting the life I'd built. "The money will be available soon," I told Michael now, my reflection in the hallway mirror showing a woman I barely recognized. Pale, hollow-eyed, diminished. "How soon? Because we've got bills that can't wait for you to have one of your thinking spells." One of my thinking spells. As if carefully considering the distribution of my life's work was a symptom of dementia rather than prudent financial planning. After I hung up, I stood in that hallway for a long time, surrounded by the photographs that chronicled our family's history. Michael's school pictures progressed from kindergarten through high school graduation, his smile growing more confident each year. There were photos from family vacations I'd saved for months to afford. Pictures from his wedding where he'd danced with me to "The Way You Look Tonight," while tears streamed down both our faces. And there, in the place of honor above the small table where I kept my keys and reading glasses, was the last photo James had taken of the three of us together. Christmas morning, 1987. Michael was 17, home from his first semester of college, and we were all wearing the matching red sweaters I'd knitted. James's arm was around my shoulders. Michael's head was leaning against mine, and we all looked genuinely happy. I touched the glass covering that photograph and whispered, "When did it all change, James? When did our son stop seeing me as his mother and start seeing me as his personal ATM?" The silence that answered me was deafening. The next morning brought another call, this time from Sarah, Michael's wife. Her voice carried that practiced sweetness she used whenever she needed something, the same tone she'd employed when asking me to co-sign their mortgage 7 years ago. "Margaret, hi, how are you feeling today?" The concern felt manufactured, like a greeting card sentiment. "Michael mentioned you seemed a little confused yesterday about the trust account." Confused. There was that word again, wielded like a scalpel to cut away my credibility. I was sitting in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd packed Michael's lunch every school day for 12 years after James died. The yellow Formica countertops showed their age, but they were spotless. I still maintained this house with the same meticulous care I'd given it when James was alive, when we'd dreamed of growing old together in these rooms. "I'm not confused, Sarah," I said, stirring sugar into my coffee with deliberate slowness. "I'm being careful. There's a difference." Of course. But you know how worried we get about you living alone in that big house. And with your episodes lately. Episodes. Another clinical term to pathologize what was simply an elderly woman's grief and exhaustion. Through the kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Henderson hanging laundry on her back porch, moving slowly but steadily. She was 3 years older than me, lived alone, managed her own finances, and nobody questioned her mental capacity. But then again, Mrs. Henderson didn't have a family dependent on her bank account. "Sarah, I've been managing my own affairs for 7 decades. I think I can handle reviewing my own financial decisions." "Oh, absolutely. It's just, well, the braces payment bounced yesterday. Olivia was so embarrassed at the orthodontist's office. And the twins' camp registration is due today or they'll lose their spots. Always the children. Always the innocent victims of my confusion and episodes. Olivia, 16 and beautiful, who hadn't visited her grandmother in 8 months. The twins, Jacob and Joshua, now 13, who used to spend every weekend here, but now claimed they were too busy with friends and sports. I remembered teaching Olivia to bake when she was 8, her small hands covered in flour as she helped me roll out pie crust. She'd worn one of my old aprons, the ties wrapped around her tiny waist twice, and she'd called me Grandma Maggie in a voice full of pure delight. When had that stopped? When had I become just Margaret to her, and then eventually, nothing at all? The account is temporarily restricted while I review the allocations, I told Sarah. I should have everything sorted out within a few weeks. A few weeks? Her voice sharpened, the sugary coating dissolving. Margaret, we can't wait a few weeks. We have obligations, bills. The kids have needs. The kids have needs. Not wants, needs. As if orthodontic adjustments and summer camps were basic necessities rather than privileges I'd been providing out of love, not obligation. What about your and Michael's salaries? I asked. Surely you can cover your children's expenses from your own income. The silence that followed was telling. Michael made good money as an insurance adjuster, and Sarah worked part-time as a dental hygienist. Combined, they earned more than James and I ever had, even adjusting for inflation. But somewhere along the way, they'd learned to see my money as an extension of their own resources, a supplemental income stream that required no gratitude or acknowledgement. Well, yes, but we budget based on the trust distributions. We've structured our whole financial plan around that support. You know that. I did know that. I knew because I'd been providing that support for 15 years, ever since Michael graduated college debt-free, thanks to the education fund I'd established by working 16-hour days and living on instant ramen. I'd paid for his wedding, their honeymoon to Italy, the down payment on their house in the suburbs, Olivia's private school tuition, countless emergencies and short-term loans that were never repaid. But what struck me most was the complete absence of gratitude in her voice. No acknowledgement that this money represented my life's work, my sacrifice, my choice to give rather than spend on myself. It had become as expected and unnoticed as air. I thought about last Christmas, when I'd given each grandchild a check for $5,000. Olivia had barely looked up from her phone when she'd opened the envelope. The twins had mumbled, "Thanks," before immediately asking if they could leave to go to their friends' houses. No hugs, no genuine appreciation, just the casual acceptance of wealth they'd done nothing to earn. Meanwhile, I'd spent Christmas Day alone, heating up a lean cuisine dinner because the elaborate family meal I'd prepared went mostly uneaten. They'd stayed for 90 minutes, long enough to collect their gifts and criticize my decorations as dated before rushing off to Sarah's parents' house for what Olivia had called the real celebration. I understand you've built your budget around the trust, I said carefully, but that doesn't mean I've forfeited my right to manage it responsibly. Margaret, nobody's questioning your right to manage your money. We're just concerned about your capacity to make complex financial decisions. Maybe it would be better if Michael handled the account going forward. You know, to take the pressure off you. Take the pressure off me. By removing my control over my own money and making me completely dependent on their goodwill for any financial autonomy. The suggestion hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. This was what they'd been building toward. Not just access to my money, but control over it. They wanted to transform me from the woman who had generously shared her wealth into a pensioner grateful for an allowance from funds I'd earned with my own hands. That won't be necessary, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. After I hung up, I walked upstairs to my bedroom and pulled out a shoebox from the top shelf of my closet. Inside were the receipts and records I'd kept of every major expense I'd covered for Michael's family over the years. Not because I'd planned to demand repayment, but because James had taught me to keep good records of all financial transactions. The numbers were staggering. College tuition, $127,000. Wedding and honeymoon, $45,000. House down payment, $60,000. Car payments when Michael lost his job in 2018, $28,000. Private school for Olivia, $89,000. The twins' travel baseball league, $15,000. Emergency home repairs when their furnace broke, $12,000. Sarah's dental work when their insurance lapsed, $8,500. And those were just the large expenses. The shoebox also contained records of countless smaller gifts and loans, money for groceries when they were tight, gas money for family trips I wasn't invited on, clothing allowances, birthday parties, holiday celebrations. Over 15 years, I had given them nearly $500,000, not invested, not loaned, given. Money that could have paid for my own care as I aged, that could have funded travel and experiences and comforts I'd denied myself in service of their comfort. In return, I had received gradual exclusion from their lives, increasing disrespect for my opinions and capabilities, and now outright attempts to question my mental competence. The irony was bitter. The more I gave, the less they valued me. The more I sacrificed, the more they expected. I had taught them, through my own generosity, to see me as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be loved. I sat on the edge of my bed, surrounded by the evidence of my own enabling, and felt something crack open inside my chest. Not my heart. That had been breaking slowly for years. This was something deeper, something structural. The fundamental belief I'd held about family, about sacrifice, about what love was supposed to look like. Outside my bedroom window, the Chicago skyline glittered in the distance, full of lights and life and possibilities I'd never explored because I'd been too busy funding other people's dreams. For the first time in decades, I wondered, what would happen if I stopped giving? What would happen if I chose myself for once? The question terrified me almost as much as it thrilled me. Almost. The chest pains started on a Tuesday morning while I was watering the geraniums on my front porch. At first, I thought it was just heartburn from the instant coffee I'd been drinking too much of lately. Grief had a way of disrupting even the most basic routines. But when the sharp squeezing sensation spread up my neck and down my left arm, I knew this was something more serious. I managed to get inside and sit down at the kitchen table, my hands shaking as I reached for my phone. The pain wasn't constant, but it came in waves that left me breathless and dizzy. James had described something similar in the days before his heart attack, though he'd dismissed it as getting old until it was too late. The rational part of my mind knew I should call 911, but the mother in me, the woman who'd been trained for 7 decades to put others first, called Michael instead. Ring, ring, ring. Hi, you've reached Michael Walsh. I can't take your call right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. I tried to keep my voice steady as I spoke to his voicemail. Michael, it's Mom. I'm having some chest pain, and I'm a little scared. Could you call me back as soon as you get this? I might need to go to the hospital. Then I waited, sitting in that kitchen chair, feeling my heartbeat flutter irregularly in my chest. I waited for my son to call back. 20 minutes passed. 30. The pain ebbed and flowed like a tide, and I found myself bargaining with God the way I had when James was dying. Just let me hear from Michael. Just let me know someone cares if I'm okay. After an hour, I called again, straight to voicemail. This time, I didn't leave a message. Instead, I sent a text with trembling fingers. Having chest pains. At home. Please call. The response came 45 minutes later. Can't talk now, in important meeting. Are you okay? Maybe call your doctor? Can't talk now. His mother was having potential cardiac symptoms, and he couldn't talk because of a meeting. I stared at that text until the words blurred. Important meeting. More important than the woman who'd worked herself to exhaustion to pay for his education, who'd mortgaged her future to secure his present, who'd given up her own dreams so he could pursue his. The chest pain was subsiding, but a different kind of pain was taking its place. The slow, crushing realization that I was truly alone, not just physically alone in this house, but fundamentally alone in the world. The people I'd spent my life caring for had learned to see me as a convenience rather than a person, a service provider rather than someone deserving of care in return. I called my doctor's office, and they managed to squeeze me in that afternoon. Doctor. Patricia Reeves had been my physician for 15 years, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd guided me through James's final illness and the grief that followed. She was one of the few people who still saw me as Margaret Walsh, the person, not Margaret Walsh, the checkbook. Your EKG looks normal, she said after running several tests. But I'm concerned about your stress levels. Your blood pressure is elevated, and you mentioned you've been having trouble sleeping. I sat on the examination table in my paper gown, feeling smaller and more fragile than I had in years. "Doctor, can I ask you something? If someone repeatedly tells you that you're forgetful, that you're not reliable anymore, could that actually be affecting my health?" Dr. Reeves set down her clipboard and looked at me with the kind of attention I hadn't received from anyone in months. "Margaret, are you being made to feel like you're losing your mental capacity?" The question broke something open inside me. I began to cry, not the dignified tears of someone experiencing momentary sadness, but the ugly, desperate sobs of someone who'd been holding back an ocean of pain. My son, his wife, they keep suggesting that I'm confused, that I can't manage my own affairs. But I'm not confused, Dr. Reeves. I know exactly what's happening. They want control of my money, and they're making me feel crazy for wanting to think carefully about how to handle it. That, she said firmly, is called gaslighting, and it's a form of psychological abuse that can absolutely cause physical symptoms. The chest pain you experience today could very well be related to the chronic stress of being manipulated and undermined. Psychological abuse. The words hung in the air like a diagnosis I'd never expected to receive. I'd thought abuse had to involve shouting or violence. I hadn't realized it could be delivered in concerned tones and loving suggestions that I wasn't capable of managing my own life. "What should I do?" I asked. "First, you should trust yourself. If you feel like you're being manipulated, you probably are. Second, you should consider reducing your exposure to people who make you question your own sanity. And third," she handed me a business card, "you should talk to someone who specializes in family dynamics and elder issues." The business card belonged to Dr. Sarah Chen, a geriatric counselor who worked with older adults navigating complex family relationships. I tucked it into my purse, feeling like I was carrying a small piece of hope. That evening, I sat in my living room with Honey curled up beside me on the couch, her warm weight a comfort against my leg. The house felt different somehow, not just empty, but honest. Without the constant anticipation of phone calls requesting money or the anxiety of wondering if I was disappointing someone, the silence felt peaceful rather than oppressive. I thought about calling Michael to tell him about my doctor's visit, but what would be the point? He'd either dismiss my concerns as more evidence of my confusion, or he'd offer superficial sympathy while secretly resenting the interruption to his busy life. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I cooked myself a real dinner. Not a microwave meal or a peanut butter sandwich, but actual food that required preparation and care. I made James's favorite pot roast, with carrots and potatoes and the herbs from the garden I'd been neglecting. The smell filled the kitchen with memories of Sunday dinners when Michael was young, when he'd help me set the table and tell me about his week at school. As I ate, I wondered, when had I stopped cooking for myself? When had I decided that a woman eating alone wasn't worth the effort of a proper meal? The answers were uncomfortable. I'd stopped cooking when Michael moved out and started his own family. I'd stopped setting a proper table when I realized no one was coming to visit. I'd gradually diminished my own life, making myself smaller and smaller until I'd nearly disappeared entirely. But tonight, eating pot roast at my kitchen table with a cloth napkin and my good china, I felt like I was remembering something important about who I used to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Hi, Margaret. Just checking in. The orthodontist called about Olivia's payment again. Any update on when the trust will be accessible?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then set my phone aside without responding. The pot roast was excellent, and I wasn't going to let their financial anxiety ruin my first peaceful meal in months. For the first time in years, I went to bed that night without feeling guilty about something I hadn't done for someone else. It was a start. The next morning brought another revelation. I was cleaning out James's old desk, a task I'd been postponing for 3 years, when I found a letter he'd written but never sent. It was addressed to Michael, dated just 2 weeks before James died. "Son," it began in his careful handwriting, "I need you to promise me something. When I'm gone, don't let your mother give away everything she's worked for. She has a generous heart, but sometimes generous people need protection from those who would take advantage of that generosity. She's stronger than she knows, but she's going to need time to remember that strength. Don't let anyone, including you, make her feel like her kindness is a weakness or her caution is confusion. She earned every penny, and she deserves to decide how it's spent. I sat in James's chair, holding his words in my trembling hands, and felt something shift inside me. My husband had seen this coming. He'd known that my love for our son might be weaponized against me, that my generosity might be mistaken for obligation. He'd been trying to protect me, even after death. Maybe it was time I started protecting myself. Was I used? The question that had been haunting me for weeks suddenly had a clear answer. Yes, I was being used. And worse, I was allowing it to happen. My silence lasted exactly 18 hours. That's how long it took for my refusal to immediately respond to Sarah's text about Olivia's orthodontist payment to trigger what I can only describe as a family emergency meeting. Not an actual emergency, of course. Just the kind of crisis that erupts when people accustomed to instant gratification encounter even the slightest resistance. Michael arrived at my front door on Thursday evening without calling first, Sarah trailing behind him with the expression of someone attending a funeral. Through the living room window, I could see Olivia slouched in the backseat of their car, earbuds in, pointedly ignoring whatever drama was unfolding on my porch. "Mom, we need to talk," Michael said when I opened the door. His tone carried the forced patience of someone dealing with a difficult child. "Can we come in?" I wanted to say no. For the first time in my adult life, I wanted to tell my son that he couldn't enter my home, that showing up unannounced and making demands wasn't acceptable behavior from a grown man. But decades of conditioning are hard to overcome, and I stepped aside to let them in. They arranged themselves in my living room like an intervention committee. Michael took James's old recliner, the one chair in the house I still considered sacred, while Sarah perched on the edge of the couch, her posture radiating barely contained urgency. "Margaret," Sarah began before I'd even sat down, "we're worried about you. Really worried. You're not responding to messages. You're being secretive about the trust fund. And yesterday you didn't even acknowledge my text about Olivia's payment." Secretive. Another loaded word designed to make my caution sound pathological. "I saw your text," I said, settling into the wooden chair I'd moved from the kitchen because all the comfortable seating was now occupied by my accusers. "I was eating dinner. For 5 hours?" Michael's eyebrows rose in the skeptical arch I remembered from his teenage years when he was caught in a lie. "Mom, it's not like you to ignore family responsibilities." Family responsibilities. When had my grandson's orthodontic care become my responsibility, rather than his parents'? When had their financial planning become my obligation to fund? "I wasn't ignoring anything," I said carefully. "I was taking time to think." "Think about what?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice dripping with the kind of concern that feels more like interrogation. "Margaret, it's a simple payment. Olivia is in pain. Her teeth are shifting back because she can't get her braces adjusted." The emotional manipulation was expertly deployed. Olivia, my granddaughter who hadn't willingly spent time with me in months, was suffering because of my selfishness. Never mind that her parents had known about this appointment for weeks. Never mind that they had their own income and could have made arrangements. "How much is the payment?" I asked. $400, Sarah said quickly. "It's not about the money, though. It's about your resistance to helping family. $400. Less than what Sarah spent on her monthly hair appointments at that fancy salon in Lincoln Park. Less than what Michael dropped on golf accessories. But when it came to their children's needs, suddenly they were financially helpless. "I'll write a check," I said, and I saw them both relax slightly. "But I want to discuss something first." Michael's expression shifted from relief back to wariness. "Discuss what?" I stood up and walked to the mantelpiece, where I kept the family photos that had once brought me joy and now felt like evidence in some cosmic trial. I picked up the picture from last Christmas, all of us around the tree, their faces politely tolerant rather than genuinely happy. "I want to talk about what this family has become," I said, turning to face them, "and what I've allowed myself to become in it." "Mom, what do you mean?" Michael's voice carried a warning note, the tone he'd used as a teenager when he sensed a lecture coming. "I mean that I've spent 15 years funding your lives while gradually disappearing from them. I pay for your children's expenses while barely knowing your children. I support your lifestyle while being excluded from your life." Sarah's mouth opened in what I assumed would be protest, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. 2 days ago, I had chest pains. Serious enough that I thought I might be having a heart attack. I called you, Michael, and you couldn't be bothered to call me back for hours because you were in a meeting. Mom, I said I'm not finished. My voice was sharper than I'd intended, but something about speaking this truth aloud was giving me strength I didn't know I still possessed. Do you know what I did after you dismissed my medical emergency? I sat in that kitchen for 3 hours, wondering if anyone would even notice if I died. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock James had inherited from his father. Outside, I could hear the distant sounds of evening life. Dogs barking, children playing, families gathering for dinner. Normal life, continuing while mine had somehow become this strange negotiation between love and money. That's dramatic, Mom, Michael said finally. You weren't having a heart attack. You're fine. I'm not fine, Michael. I haven't been fine for years. And the reason I'm not fine is that you've convinced me I don't matter except as a source of funding for your problems. Sarah stood up abruptly, her careful composure cracking. That's not fair, Margaret. We love you. We include you. You're always welcome at family dinners. When was the last time you invited me to a family dinner? I asked quietly. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could see them both thinking, trying to remember a recent invitation that we all knew didn't exist. You're always busy, Sarah said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. I'm a 73-year-old widow. What exactly do you think I'm busy with? Michael stood up from his father's chair, his face flushed with the kind of anger that comes from being forced to confront uncomfortable truths. Mom, this is ridiculous. We're here because we care about you. Because we're worried about these episodes you've been having. Episodes. There was that word again, wielded like a weapon to discredit my emotions and concerns. The only episode I'm having, I said, meeting his eyes directly, is finally seeing clearly. And what I see is that you've learned to value my money more than my presence. That's not true. Sarah's voice rose to near shriek levels. How can you say that? After everything we do for you, what do you do for me? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Name one thing you've done for me in the past year that wasn't related to managing my finances or my property. Again, silence. I watched them search their memories for evidence of care that existed only in their own narratives of themselves as loving children and devoted family members. We call you, Michael said weakly, to ask for money. We invite you to things. Name one. Mom, this is crazy. You're our family. We love you. Then why? I asked, my voice breaking slightly. Do I feel so alone? The question seemed to deflate something in the room. Michael sat back down heavily, and Sarah wrapped her arms around herself as if she was cold. Margaret, Sarah said, her voice softer now but still carrying that undertone of manipulation. Maybe you should talk to someone, a professional, about these feelings. There it was. The suggestion that my perfectly rational response to being used and dismissed was a mental health issue requiring professional intervention. The implication that my growing awareness of their treatment was a symptom of cognitive decline rather than emotional clarity. I am talking to someone, I said. Dr. Chen. She specializes in family dynamics and elder abuse. The word abuse hit them like a physical blow. Michael's face went pale, and Sarah actually took a step backward. Abuse? Michael's voice was barely a whisper. Mom, nobody's abusing you. We're trying to help you. By questioning my mental capacity every time I want to make my own decisions about my own money? By being concerned when you start acting differently. Differently how? By not immediately responding to demands for money? By taking time to consider my options? By expecting to be treated with respect? Michael stood up again, his movement sharp and angry. Respect? Mom, we've never disrespected you. You dismissed my medical emergency for a meeting. It was an important client. More important than your mother's life? The question hung between us like a sword. I could see him struggling with the implications of what he'd just revealed. That yes, his business concerns had taken priority over my physical well-being. That's not what I meant, he said. But we both knew it was exactly what he meant. I think you should leave, I said quietly. Mom, I think you should leave now. And I think you should spend some time considering whether you want a relationship with me or with my bank account, because you can't have both anymore. Sarah moved toward the door, pulling Michael with her. At the threshold, she turned back. What about Olivia's payment? The question revealed everything. After an emotional confrontation about love and respect and family bonds, her first concern was still the money. I'll think about it, I said, and closed the door. Through the front window, I watched them walk to their car in heated discussion. Olivia looked up from her phone just long enough to register that the adults were upset, then returned to her screen with the supreme indifference of adolescence. As their taillights disappeared down the street, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The power of saying no. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The silence in my house after they left felt different than any silence I'd experienced before. Not the hollow emptiness of abandonment, but the clean, pure quiet of a space finally cleared of toxicity. I sat in my kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the steam rise in delicate spirals, and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this calm. For the first time in months, my phone wasn't buzzing with urgent requests or guilt-laden messages. For the first time in years, I wasn't anticipating the next financial crisis I'd be expected to solve. I was simply present in my own life, in my own home, with my own thoughts. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done since James died. I made myself a proper breakfast. Not toast grabbed while rushing to meet someone else's deadline, but actual eggs Benedict with hollandaise sauce from scratch. I set the dining room table with my good china, the spode pattern James had bought me for our 20th anniversary, and I ate slowly, savoring each bite while reading the newspaper. It felt revolutionary. At 10 o'clock, I called Dr. Chen's office and scheduled an appointment. The receptionist could fit me in that afternoon, and I found myself looking forward to it with an anticipation I hadn't felt about anything in months. Dr. Sarah Chen's office was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the sterile, clinical environment I'd imagined, it was warm and comfortable, with soft lighting and bookshelves filled with volumes on psychology, family dynamics, and what appeared to be several memoirs. She was younger than I'd anticipated, perhaps in her early 40s, with kind eyes and an unhurried manner that immediately put me at ease. "Tell me what brought you here, Margaret," she said after we'd settled into facing chairs near a window that looked out onto a small garden. I found myself telling her everything. The gradual erosion of my relationship with Michael, the increasing financial demands, the suggestions that I was becoming incompetent, the chest pains they'd dismissed, the intervention in my living room. Dr. Chen listened without interruption, occasionally making notes but mostly just giving me her complete attention. "How do you feel when you're around your family?" she asked when I'd finished. "Anxious," I said immediately. "Like I'm always being evaluated. Like I'm failing some test I don't understand. And how do you feel right now talking about it?" I considered the question carefully. Angry, but also relieved? Like maybe I'm not losing my mind after all. Dr. Chen smiled. "Margaret, you're not losing your mind. What you're describing is a pattern of financial abuse combined with psychological manipulation. It's more common than you might think, especially with adult children who become financially dependent on aging parents. Financial abuse. There was that clinical term again, but hearing it from Dr. Chen didn't feel like an accusation. It felt like validation. "The good news," she continued, "is that you have all the power here. You control the resources they want access to. The question is, what do you want to do with that power? What did I want?" It was such a simple question, but I realized I hadn't asked it of myself in decades. I'd spent so many years focused on what others wanted from me that I'd forgotten I had wants of my own. "I want to feel valued for who I am, not what I can provide," I said slowly. "I want my family to choose to spend time with me because they enjoy my company, not because they need something. And I paused, surprised by what I was about to say. "I want to live my own life for whatever time I have left." "Those are reasonable wants," Dr. Chen said. "What would need to change for you to have those things?" The answer was clear. Even if it was terrifying, I'd need to stop giving them money. "How does that idea make you feel?" "Scared," I admitted. "What if they stop talking to me altogether? What if I end up completely alone? Margaret, Are you truly connected to them now? Or are you just funding a relationship that exists primarily on paper? The question hit like a physical blow because the answer was so obvious. I wasn't connected to them now. I was a resource they managed, a problem they solved, an obligation they fulfilled. The relationship I was so afraid of losing had already been lost years ago. I left Dr. Chen's office with homework. She wanted me to make a list of what I actually wanted from my remaining years, and another list of what I was currently spending money on that didn't align with those wants. The exercise seemed simple, but I suspected it would be revelatory. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and began writing. The wants list came slowly at first, then faster as I gave myself permission to dream. Travel to Ireland, where James's family came from. Take a cooking class and learn to make French pastry. Visit art museums without feeling guilty about the time or expense. Have a garden party with friends I actually chose. Read all the books I'd been meaning to read. Take care of myself without having to justify the cost. Sleep peacefully without anxiety about the next financial request. The second list, what I was currently funding, filled 3 pages. Michael's mortgage assistance, Olivia's private school and orthodontics, the twins' sports and camps, Sarah's car payments, holiday gifts that cost more than I spent on myself in 6 months, emergency loans that were never repaid, insurance policies for people who barely acknowledged my existence. The contrast was stark. I was funding everyone else's dreams while abandoning my own. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I found a message from Olivia. "Grandma, Mom said you're mad at us. I don't understand what's happening, but I hope you're okay. I miss you." The message broke my heart and strengthened my resolve simultaneously. Here was my granddaughter, reaching out not for money, but for connection. The first genuine expression of care I'd received from my family in months. I called her directly. "Grandma?" Her voice was small, uncertain. "Hi, sweetheart. I got your text. Are you really mad at us? Mom's been crying and Dad's been slamming doors and nobody will tell me what's going on." The honesty in her voice reminded me of the little girl who used to help me bake cookies, before adolescence and family dynamics had complicated our relationship. "I'm not mad, Olivia. I'm just taking some time to think about things. How are you?" "Really? I'm okay, I guess. School's hard. The braces hurt. But Grandma, why won't you help with the payment? Mom says we might have to take them off if you don't." And there it was. Even this sweet moment of connection was being weaponized. Sarah had sent Olivia to make this call, knowing I couldn't resist my granddaughter's voice. "Olivia, honey, can I ask you something? When was the last time we spent time together? Just the two of us?" Long pause. I don't remember. Maybe Christmas? Would you like to?" Spend time together, I mean. Not talking about braces or money, just being together? "Yeah," she said, and I could hear surprise in her voice, as if the idea of spending time with me for its own sake was novel. "I'd really like that. Then let's plan something. Just us. This weekend?" After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hands, feeling something shift inside me. This was what I wanted. Genuine connection with my granddaughter, not mediated by financial transactions or parental manipulation. The next morning, I walked into First National Bank and asked to speak with a financial advisor. Patricia Williams was a woman about my age who'd helped me set up the family trust years earlier. She greeted me with the professional warmth of someone who'd known me for decades. "Margaret, how can I help you today?" "I want to restructure my accounts," I said. "I want to separate my personal expenses from family support, and I want to establish clear boundaries around both." Patricia nodded as if she'd had this conversation before. "Are you looking to reduce family support or eliminate it entirely?" "I want it to be intentional rather than automatic. I want to choose when and how to help, rather than being expected to solve every problem." We spent 2 hours restructuring my finances. I created a separate account for family assistance with a monthly limit that I could control. I established automatic transfers to a travel fund, a personal enrichment fund, and an emergency fund that only I could access. For the first time in my adult life, I prioritized my own financial security. "These are smart moves," Patricia said as we finished the paperwork. A lot of people your age find themselves in similar situations. Children get comfortable with parental support and forget that their parents have their own needs and dreams. When I got home, there were 6 missed calls from Michael and a string of increasingly frantic texts from Sarah about the orthodontist threatening to remove Olivia's braces. The financial panic I'd predicted was already beginning, but instead of the familiar knot of anxiety their urgency usually created, I felt something else. Power. The power of choice. The power to say yes or no based on my own values rather than their manipulation. I didn't call them back immediately. Instead, I made myself lunch, took Honey for a long walk around the neighborhood, and spent an hour reading in the garden James had planted. For the first time in years, I was living on my own timeline. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful. The family meeting was Sarah's idea, delivered via a formal email that read like a corporate summons. Family financial discussion, Sunday 2 p.m., your residence. Please confirm attendance. As if I might decline to show up at my own intervention. I spent Saturday morning preparing for what I knew would be my last stand. I organized all my financial records, the bank statements showing my restructured accounts, the documentation of 15 years of family support, even James's letter warning about exactly this scenario. I wasn't planning to be cruel, but I was done being a victim. Olivia and I had spent Friday afternoon together for the first time in over a year, just the two of us. We'd gone to the Art Institute, wandered through the Impressionist galleries, and shared hot chocolate afterward at a little cafe in Grant Park. She'd talked about school, her friends, her dreams of maybe studying art in college. For 3 hours, we were simply grandmother and granddaughter, without the burden of family drama or financial expectations. "Grandma," she'd said as I dropped her off at home, "I had fun today. Like, actual fun. Can we do it again?" "Whenever you want, sweetheart. You don't need anyone's permission to spend time with me." Now, watching the family convoy pull into my driveway, Michael's car followed by Sarah's SUV with the twins, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete clarity about my own worth. They entered like a military operation. Michael and Sarah took the living room couch, flanking the twins, who looked uncomfortable and confused. Olivia positioned herself in the window seat, as far from the adults as possible. The power dynamic was clear. The adults united against me, with the children as unwilling witnesses. "Mom," Michael began, his voice carrying the weight of someone delivering a prepared speech, "we need to talk about what's been happening with your finances." "My finances are fine," I said calmly, settling into the chair I'd placed deliberately to face them all. "Thank you for your concern." Sarah leaned forward, her expression a mixture of frustration and forced patience. "Margaret," the orthodontist called again. "Olivia's treatment is being suspended. The twins' summer camp registration was rejected. Your account restrictions are affecting the children." The children. Always the children. As if my financial boundaries were a form of child abuse rather than responsible money management. "Those aren't my account restrictions," I said. "Those are your budget management issues." Michael's face reddened. "Mom, we've planned our finances around the trust distributions. You can't just suddenly change the rules. I can change any rules I want regarding my own money. That's what ownership means." "But family," Sarah said, her voice rising. "Family means supporting each other. It means sacrifice. It means love," I interrupted. "And love isn't purchased. It's given freely, or it isn't love at all." Olivia looked up from her phone, and I caught her eye. She'd been quiet during this exchange, but I could see her processing the adult dynamics with the sharp perception of adolescence. "Grandma," 13-year-old Jacob spoke for the first time, his voice cracking with the uncertainty of puberty. "Are you mad at us? Because we didn't do anything wrong." The innocence in his question broke my heart. These children had been raised to see me as a financial resource, but they weren't responsible for the lessons their parents had taught them. "I'm not mad at you, Jacob. I'm not mad at any of you children. I love you very much, and that will never change." "Then why won't you help us?" Joshua, Jacob's twin, asked with the directness that only children possess. "Because helping and enabling are different things," I said gently, "and because your parents need to learn to take care of you themselves." Sarah's composure finally cracked. "Margaret, that's not fair. You can't just abandon your family because you're having some kind of crisis. What kind of crisis would that be, Sarah? This whole independence thing, this rebellion. It's like you're having a breakdown and punishing us for trying to help. There it was again. The suggestion that my emotional health was the problem, that my newfound clarity was evidence of mental instability. I'm not having a breakdown, I said quietly. I'm having a breakthrough. Michael stood up abruptly, his patience exhausted. Mom, this is ridiculous. You're acting like we're strangers trying to steal from you. We're your family. We love you. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? Not to ask for money or manage my affairs, but simply to talk to me? The silence that followed was deafening. When was the last time you invited me to dinner? When was the last time you included me in a family decision? When was the last time any of you treated me like a person rather than a problem to be solved? More silence. That's what I thought. I stood up and walked to the mantelpiece, picking up the shoebox I'd prepared earlier. This contains records of every major expense I've covered for this family over the past 15 years. Nearly $500,000. College tuition, wedding costs, house down payments, car loans, children's expenses, emergency repairs, medical bills. I opened the box and let some of the receipts spill onto the coffee table. $500,000, and not once, has anyone thanked me for the sacrifice that money represented. Not once has anyone acknowledged that this came from my retirement, my security, my future. Sarah was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration, of someone watching their financial safety net disappear. We appreciate everything you've done, she said between sobs. But you're our family. That's what family does. No, I said firmly. That's what banks do. What family does is love unconditionally, spend time together by choice, and treat each other with respect and dignity. I walked to my purse and pulled out the checkbook I'd brought specifically for this moment. Olivia's orthodontic payment, I said, writing a check for $400. Consider this my final automatic payment for anything. The relief on their faces was visible, but premature. From now on, I continued, any financial assistance will be requested formally, discussed thoroughly, and granted at my discretion. No more assumptions. No more automatic withdrawals. No more treating my generosity as your entitlement. Michael's relief transformed back into anger. You're punishing us for loving you. I'm teaching you to love me properly. This is crazy, Mom. You're 73 years old. You shouldn't be making these kinds of major decisions without family input. And there it was. The final card they'd been building toward. The suggestion that my age disqualified me from managing my own affairs. I'm 73, I said, my voice steady and clear. Not incompetent. I've managed my own finances for over 50 years. I've raised a child, survived widowhood, built a substantial savings account, and maintained my independence. The only thing that's changed is that I've stopped allowing you to take advantage of my generosity. I walked to the front door and opened it. I think this conversation is over. Sarah stood up, gathering her purse with shaking hands. Margaret, please don't do this. Please don't tear this family apart over money. I'm not tearing anything apart. I'm revealing what was already broken. As they filed out, each face showing a different combination of anger, confusion, and fear, Olivia lingered at the doorway. Grandma, she whispered, I'm sorry about all of this. You have nothing to apologize for, sweetheart. You're not responsible for adult decisions. Can I still call you? Can we still spend time together? Always. My door is always open for you, Olivia. All of you children, actually. But the ATM is closed. After they left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the scattered receipts of my generosity, feeling something I hadn't experienced in decades, complete ownership of my own life. My phone would ring. There would be more angry calls, more manipulative messages, more attempts to make me feel guilty for choosing myself. But for the first time since James died, I felt truly alive. The woman who had baked cookies for ungrateful grandchildren and written checks for unappreciative children was gone. In her place sat Margaret Eleanor Walsh. Not someone's resource, not anyone's backup plan, but a woman with her own dreams, her own value, her own beautiful life to live. And she was just getting started. The silence that followed their departure wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. For 3 days, my phone remained mercifully quiet. No demands, no guilt trips, no manufactured emergencies requiring my immediate financial intervention. Just blessed, beautiful silence that allowed me to hear something I'd forgotten existed, my own voice. On Wednesday morning, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I called a travel agent. "I'd like to book a trip to Ireland," I told the young woman whose cheerful voice seemed to brighten even through the phone. "Something special. Maybe 3 weeks?" "How wonderful! Is this for a special occasion?" I paused, considering the question. "Yes," I said finally. "It's for my 73rd birthday, my gift to myself." By Friday, I had a complete itinerary. Dublin, the Cliffs of Moher, the Ring of Kerry, and a week in County Cork, where James's great-grandfather had been born. I'd booked myself into charming bed and breakfasts, arranged for a private driver, and even signed up for a cooking class in a restored castle. The total cost was less than what I'd spent on Michael's family in the past 6 months. The travel agent had been effusive. "Mrs. Walsh, this sounds like the trip of a lifetime." "That's exactly what it is," I'd replied, feeling a lightness in my chest I hadn't experienced since before James died. Saturday brought my first real test. Olivia called, her voice small and uncertain. "Grandma, are you really going to Ireland?" "I am, sweetheart. I leave in 3 weeks. Mom says you're having some kind of breakdown. She says you're spending money recklessly, and that's why you can't help us anymore." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar surge of anger at Sarah's manipulation of my granddaughter. "Olivia, do you think planning a thoughtful trip to honor my heritage and celebrate my birthday is reckless?" "No. It sounds kind of amazing, actually. I've always wanted to travel. Then maybe when you're 18, you can come with me on an adventure. Somewhere we both want to go." "Really?" The hope in her voice was heartbreaking. "You'd want me to come?" "Sweetheart, I'd love nothing more than to share the world with you. Just the two of us, making memories that belong to us." After we hung up, I realized something profound had shifted. For the first time in years, I was making plans that excited me, rather than plans that solved other people's problems. That afternoon, I drove to Northwestern University and enrolled in an art history class I'd been wanting to take for decades. The professor was a dynamic woman in her 40s who welcomed older students with genuine enthusiasm. The Renaissance, she explained to our diverse group of learners, wasn't just about art. It was about rebirth, about rediscovering human potential after a dark period. It was about people deciding they deserved beauty and growth and intellectual stimulation. I found myself taking notes with the intensity of my college days, filling margins with thoughts and questions I hadn't allowed myself to explore in years. The young students around me seemed curious rather than dismissive when I participated in discussions, and I realized how much I'd missed intellectual conversation. The following week brought unexpected visitors. Mrs. Henderson from next door appeared at my kitchen door with a casserole and an expression of concern. "Margaret, dear, I don't mean to pry, but I haven't seen your son's car in your driveway lately. Is everything all right?" I invited her in for coffee and found myself sharing an abbreviated version of recent events. To my surprise, Mrs. Henderson nodded knowingly. "My daughter tried something similar when her husband lost his job," she said, stirring sugar into her cup with deliberate slowness. Suddenly, every conversation was about how I needed help managing my finances. Wanted me to add her name to my accounts, just in case. It took me a while to realize she wasn't worried about my capacity. She was worried about her access. "What did you do?" "Same thing you did, eventually. I chose myself." She smiled, and I noticed how much younger she looked when her face lit up. "Best decision I ever made. My daughter and I have a much better relationship now that it's not contaminated by money." That evening, Michael called. His voice was different, less demanding, more uncertain. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said, about when I last called just to talk." I waited, not making it easy for him. "I can't remember," he admitted. "And that bothers me." "It should," I said gently. "But it's not too late to change that. I don't know how. I don't know what we'd talk about if we weren't discussing logistics." The admission broke my heart because it revealed the depth of what we'd lost. My son no longer knew how to have a relationship with me beyond financial transactions. We could start with how you're doing, I suggested. Not what you need or what's wrong, but how you actually are. What makes you happy these days? What worries you? What are you proud of? The conversation that followed was tentative but real. He told me about a promotion he was hoping for, about his concerns for the twins' adjustment to middle school, about a book he'd been reading. I shared my excitement about Ireland, my art history class, the friends I was making in my neighborhood. For 30 minutes, we talked like two adults who cared about each other rather than like a bank and a client. "Mom," he said before we hung up, "I'm sorry. I don't know when I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as security, but I want to fix that." "I'd like that too," I said. "But Michael, it has to be real. It can't be strategy to regain access to the money." "I understand." 2 weeks before my departure for Ireland, Sarah showed up alone. She looked different, smaller somehow, less confident. I invited her in, curious about what had brought her to my door without Michael or the children as backup. "Margaret, I need to apologize," she said without preamble. "Not because I want money, but because I've been thinking about what you said. About love not being purchased." I gestured for her to sit, surprised by her directness. "I realized that I've been so focused on what you could provide that I stopped getting to know who you are. I don't know your favorite color, or what kind of movies you like, or what you dream about. I know your bank balance better than I know your personality." The admission was startling in its honesty. "I also realized," she continued, "that we've been terrible role models for the kids. We've taught them that love comes with a price tag, that relationships are transactional. Olivia asked me yesterday why we never invite you to dinner just because we want to see you. What did you tell her?" I couldn't answer, because I realized we don't. We invite you when we need something or when it's expected for holidays, but never just because we miss you. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they seemed different from her previous emotional displays. These tears felt genuine rather than manipulative. "I don't know if we can fix this," she said. "I don't know if you can forgive us for treating you like an ATM instead of family, but I want to try. Not for the money. I've accepted that's over, but because I want my children to know their grandmother as a person, not as a financial resource. That's all I've ever wanted," I said quietly. The night before I left for Ireland, I packed my suitcase with clothes I'd bought specifically for this trip. Not practical, budget-conscious outfits, but beautiful things that made me feel elegant and worthy of adventure. I'd even bought new luggage, soft leather pieces that spoke of journeys and discoveries, rather than the worn canvas bags I'd used for rare family obligations. As I folded each carefully chosen item, I thought about the woman who would wear these clothes. She was confident, curious, unafraid to dine alone in restaurants or strike up conversations with strangers. She valued her own company and trusted her own judgment. She was someone I was still getting to know, but someone I was beginning to love. Olivia called just as I was closing the suitcase. "Grandma, I want you to know something. I'm proud of you." "Proud of me? For choosing yourself, for showing me that it's okay to want beautiful things for your own life, for teaching me that love shouldn't cost anything. Thank you, sweetheart. That means more to me than you know. Have the most amazing time. Take pictures of everything. And Grandma? Yes? Save room for one more adventure when you get back. I want to plan something special for just the two of us." As I hung up the phone, I realized that something magical had happened. By choosing myself, I hadn't lost my family. I'd found them. The people who truly loved me had remained, while the relationships based on obligation and financial benefit had simply dissolved. I looked around my bedroom, my sanctuary, my space, my domain, and felt something I hadn't experienced since I was a young woman. Excitement about my own future. Tomorrow I would board a plane to Ireland, not as someone fleeing her problems, but as someone embracing her possibilities. Margaret Eleanor Walsh was finally ready to meet the world on her own terms, and the world, I suspected, was ready for her too. 6 months later, I stood on the cliffs of Moher in County Clare, Ireland, watching the Atlantic Ocean stretch endlessly toward America. The wind whipped through my silver hair I'd stopped coloring because I'd finally decided that gray was beautiful, and I felt more alive than I had in decades. The trip had been everything I'd hoped and more. I'd traced James's family history through ancient church records, learned to make traditional Irish soda bread from a woman whose grandmother had taught her the recipe, and spent evenings in cozy pubs listening to traditional music while sipping whiskey that tasted like liquid courage. But the most profound moment had come in a small village in County Cork, when I'd met another American woman traveling alone. Eleanor Murphy was 81, had been widowed for 12 years, and was on her 4th solo international adventure. My children used to worry about me traveling alone, she'd told me over dinner at a charming inn overlooking the Irish countryside. They wanted me to move into assisted living, give up my independence, let them manage my affairs. They thought I was too old, too fragile, too confused to make my own decisions. What changed their minds? I'd asked. Eleanor had laughed, a sound like silver bells in the evening air. I stopped asking for their permission to live my life. Once they realized they couldn't control me, they started respecting me. Funny how that works. Her words had echoed in my mind during the long flight home, and they were still with me now, as I sat in my art history class, surrounded by students young enough to be my grandchildren, discussing the symbolism in Renaissance paintings with the passion of someone discovering beauty for the first time. Professor Martinez had asked us to write about a painting that spoke to us personally. I'd chosen Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, not for its famous beauty, but for its theme of emergence, of a goddess rising from the waters fully formed and completely herself. Mrs. Walsh, Professor Martinez said after class, your essay was remarkable. Have you considered auditing more courses? Your perspective brings something unique to our discussions. Unique. When was the last time someone had called me unique? When had I last been valued for my thoughts rather than my bank balance? The drive home took me through neighborhoods I was seeing with new eyes. Instead of envying the large houses and perfect lawns, I felt gratitude for my own comfortable brownstone with its lived-in character and memories embedded in every room. I'd redecorated since Ireland, not to impress anyone, but to please myself. The walls now held photographs from my travels alongside artwork I'd bought from local artists. The living room furniture was arranged for conversation and reading rather than television watching. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Grandma, can't wait for our movie night tomorrow. I found the perfect classic film for us to watch together. Also, I got accepted to the summer art program at the Art Institute. Thank you for encouraging me to apply. Olivia and I had developed a tradition of monthly movie nights where we watched films from different decades, discussing everything from costume design to social history. Last month, we'd watched Casablanca, and she'd been fascinated by the wartime context. These evenings had become precious to both of us, time when she could ask questions about life and love and growing up, and I could share the wisdom I'd accumulated over 7 decades. More importantly, these conversations happened naturally, without the pressure of financial transactions or family politics. She came because she wanted to be there, and I treasured her presence because it was freely given. Michael had been calling regularly too, though our relationship was still finding its new rhythm. Last week he'd shared something that had moved me deeply. He and Sarah were seeing a marriage counselor to work on their communication and financial independence. They'd realized that their dependence on my money had created stress in their own relationship, preventing them from developing confidence in their ability to provide for their family. We want to model something different for the kids, he'd told me. We want them to see parents who work together to solve problems rather than parents who expect other people to solve problems for them. The twins had started visiting again too, but the dynamic was completely different. Instead of rushed, obligation visits focused on collecting gifts or money, they came to help me with projects around the house or to learn skills like cooking and gardening. Jacob had discovered a talent for photography and often brought his camera to document our activities. Joshua had inherited his great-grandfather James's mechanical aptitude and enjoyed helping me with small repairs and improvements. These weren't the financially motivated relationships of the past, but genuine connections based on shared interests and mutual affection. Even Sarah had surprised me. 2 months ago, she'd asked if I wanted to join her book club, not because they needed financial support for their meetings, but because she thought I'd enjoy the discussions. The book club had introduced me to women my own age who were navigating similar life transitions: widowhood, changing relationships with adult children, rediscovering personal identity after decades of defining themselves through service to others. One evening, as we discussed a memoir about a woman who'd started a new career at 70, Sarah had made an observation that stunned me with its insight. "I think I was so afraid of you aging and becoming dependent that I tried to make you dependent before you actually needed help. I was managing my own anxiety about losing you by controlling you." The honesty in her admission had opened a door to a different kind of relationship, one where we could acknowledge difficult truths and work through them together, rather than pretending everything was fine, while resentment festered beneath the surface. This morning had brought news that would have devastated the old Margaret, but filled the new Margaret with quiet satisfaction. Michael's company was downsizing, and his position was being eliminated. Instead of immediately calling me for financial rescue, he'd called to share his plan for finding new employment, and his confidence that he and Sarah could handle this challenge together. "We've got savings now," he'd said with pride I hadn't heard in his voice for years. "Not a lot, but enough to get us through a few months while I look for something new. And Sarah's increased her hours at the dental office. We're scared, but we're not panicked. We know we can figure this out." The man who'd once questioned my mental capacity for wanting to review my own financial decisions was now demonstrating exactly the kind of resilience and self-reliance I'd hoped to nurture by stepping back from my role as their permanent safety net. This evening, as I sat in my garden watching the sunset paint my flowers in shades of gold and coral, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 18 months ago, I'd been a woman whose primary identity was financial provider, whose value was measured by her willingness to sacrifice her own needs for others' convenience. I'd been disappearing slowly, becoming invisible in my own life while everyone around me thrived on resources I'd accumulated through decades of hard work and careful saving. Now I was Margaret Eleanor Walsh, not someone's mother first, not someone's financial resource, but a complete person with her own dreams, interests, relationships, and adventures. I was a student, a traveler, a friend, a grandmother who was chosen rather than obligated, a woman who'd learned to value her own company and trust her own judgment. The phone rang, breaking my reverie. It was Eleanor Murphy, calling from her home in Boston. "Margaret, dear, how are you settling back into life after Ireland?" "Beautifully," I said, surprising myself with the immediate honesty of my response. "I feel like I'm finally living my own life instead of managing everyone else's." "That's wonderful to hear. I'm calling because I'm planning a trip to Tuscany in the fall, and I wondered if you might be interested in joining me. I know we've only known each other a short time, but I have a feeling we could have some marvelous adventures together." The invitation filled me with the same excitement I'd felt as a young woman receiving invitations to parties or dates. When was the last time someone had invited me somewhere for the pleasure of my company, rather than out of obligation or need? "I'd love to," I said without hesitation. "Let's plan something extraordinary." After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness, surrounded by the sounds of evening in Chicago. Distant traffic, children playing in nearby yards, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. My house felt peaceful rather than empty, and my future felt full of possibility rather than predetermined obligation. Tomorrow, I would call Patricia at the bank and set up a small scholarship fund for older women returning to education, not because anyone expected me to, but because I wanted to help other women discover the joy of learning something new in the second half of life. Next week, I would start volunteering at a literacy program, teaching adults to read, not to fill empty time, but because I'd rediscovered my love of words and wanted to share that gift. And in the fall, I would explore Tuscany with a new friend, creating memories that belonged entirely to me. I thought about the voice message that had started this whole journey, my son telling me I was forgettable, unreliable, not worth his immediate attention when I was in medical distress. That message had broken something in me, but it had also awakened something, the recognition that I deserved better than I was accepting. The old Margaret would have internalized those words, would have tried harder to prove her worth through greater sacrifice and more generous giving. The new Margaret understood that when someone tells you that you're forgettable, the problem isn't your memory, it's their vision. I was not forgettable. I was unforgettable to the people who chose to truly see me. I was not unreliable. I was selectively reliable to those who earned my reliability through their own consistency and care. I was not a resource to be managed or a problem to be solved. I was a woman with my own beautiful, complicated, worthy life to live. As I prepared to go inside, I noticed a shooting star streak across the darkening sky. I'd never been one for making wishes, but tonight felt different. "Thank you," I whispered to the universe, to James, to the woman I used to be who'd had the courage to demand better. "Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to choose yourself." Inside, my house welcomed me with warm light and familiar comforts. On my kitchen table sat tomorrow's plans: train tickets for a day trip to Milwaukee with Olivia, registration forms for a watercolor painting class, and a letter from a woman who'd read about my Ireland trip in the church newsletter and wanted advice about traveling alone after her husband's death. People were seeking me out now, not for money, but for wisdom, companionship, and inspiration. I'd become someone worth knowing rather than someone worth using. The legacy I was creating wasn't measured in dollars distributed or problems solved for others. It was measured in the example I was setting, that women of any age deserve respect, deserve adventure, deserve to be chosen rather than taken for granted. It was measured in the granddaughter who now saw her own possibilities reflected in her grandmother's courage. It was measured in the friends who'd watched me transform and found inspiration for their own journeys. It was measured in the peace I felt each night, knowing I'd lived that day for myself as well as others. This was the legacy I choose to leave, not the memory of a woman who gave everything away, but the memory of a woman who knew her own worth and insisted that others recognize it too. And as I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I realized the most beautiful part of this story wasn't the ending. It was the beginning. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you ever wondered if your worth is measured only by what you can provide, rather than who you are? Tell me in the comments. Have you lived this story, or do you know someone who has? If this message resonated with you, please share it. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and help this story reach someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to choose yourself, because you are not forgettable. You are unforgettable to those who truly see you, and you deserve to be chosen, not used. Your life is waiting for you to claim it.